data goes down, everything goes down, your connectivity, the bank goes down. And bankers know that as soon as something like that happens, your
anchor for local cloud data centers is a demand anchor for interconnection, is a demand anchor for financial.
Artificial intelligence is thriving up is data. If you took away data, you've taken away the oxygen from AI. And if you take a look at the AI, there were no data center experts. Today, surprisingly, if you put an advert, you're looking for data center, you have very, very, very qualified.
And welcome to this special edition of Africa Hyperscalers Global View. Thank you for your patience. We're starting just 4 minutes after the scheduled time, but I'm sure we're going to give you a very interesting and well-packaged session. Today's session is themed from regulation to infrastructure, what the Central Bank of Nigeria's Data Localization Directive means for Nigeria's digital economy. And last week, the Central Bank of Nigeria issued a circular directing banks, fintechs, mobile money operators, and other payment service providers to disclose, among other things, there was a raft of directives. One was to disclose ultimate beneficial ownership, localized payment transaction data generated in Nigeria, and comply with new market share limits aimed at reducing compliance risk. Our focus really for this session is really the data localization. And this directive from the Apex Bank moves data localization from policy discussion to implementation. Banks, fintech operators, mobile money operators, processors, and other payment service providers are now expected to ensure that payment transaction data generated in Nigeria is stored and managed locally in Nigeria by January 1, 2027. But the bigger question really for the country today is not really only where the data sits. It's whether Nigeria has the cloud capacity, the data center resilience, the interconnection, disaster recovery, compliance architecture, and operational maturity to support critical financial workloads at scale similar to what we see in other climes. But I should preface here that this discussion is not really a debate for or against regulation. It's about what must happen next now following that directive. How ready is the infrastructure? What does compliance mean in practice? What should banks and fintechs begin to demand from providers? Where are the real gaps? And how can regulators, infrastructure providers, financial institutions, technology companies work together to make this directive practical, secure, and commercially sustainable? Having spent almost 2 decades in Africa's digital infrastructure industry, I believe this policy creates one of the strongest demand signals yet for local data centers, cloud platforms, interconnection services. Financial institutions and payments providers generate some of Nigeria's most critical digital workloads. Bringing more of those workloads onshore can improve resilience, deepen its internet maturity, retain more digital spending locally, and incentivize investments in power reliability, in disaster recovery, in operational standards, in cybersecurity, and many others. And this move by Nigeria is also being watched keenly across the continent as more regulators are beginning to consider data governance, digital sovereignty, and cloud localization policies. This will not be easy, but it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. We can do this now, we can do this in 15 years, but we will do it. We're joined today by leaders across Nigeria's digital infrastructure and financial technology. Benga Debiji is Chief Executive Officer of Genisev, who built Minwon's first data centers in West Africa before the company's acquisition by Equinix. And Genisev is the technical advisor of the federal government, the federal ministry's Project Bridge broadband initiative. Ayotunde Koka, Dr. Ayotunde Koka is the Chief Executive Officer of Open Access Data Centers and former chairman of the African Data Centers Association. Dr. Yele Okeremi is the Chief Executive Officer of Precise Financial Systems. And he's been a deep CTO before his role as Chief Executive Officer of Precise Financial Systems. He was a long-time CTO of banks in Nigeria. We recognize the concerns of fintechs and banks, including the fact that some of them are not yet quite comfortable speaking publicly, as they are still seeking clarity on the implementation. This is why this session was set up, because we hope to provide more information, more confidence, and a clearer pathway from regulatory intent to operational execution. So we'll jump right in. So thank you all, our speakers. It's a great pleasure to have you. So we'll jump right in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Koka. And we're starting with you. So, Doctor, can you give us some context into this new CBN circular and what have informed it? And I know you have legacy understanding of this from the CBN's shared hosting policy about 11, 12, 13 years ago till now. And then how does this broadly connect with NITDA, the National Information Technology Development Agency's phased national cloud policy? And what does this policy really signal to you? Is it a data protection move? Is it a payment oversight move, as a lot of people have said it? Is it an infrastructure sovereignty move, or is it all three?
Okay. Wow, that's a lot. It's a multifaceted question. I'll start with, before getting to the all three, the journey to date. When 16 years ago now, so 17 years ago, I came here as the group CIO for Access Bank. And I remember beforehand, I said, the issues, data centers. And I thought, well, why would you want to build a data center? So, of course, the idea of co-locating was alien at the time, broadly. I got back here and I couldn't find a half-decent co-location data center for the scale of the bank infrastructure. And I recall Yele was one of the industry individuals I worked with then, as we were even doing our bit to transform technology in banking. It just shows actually what Precise Financials has done, how much world-class can be located in Nigeria. And going back that far, this is not just the last 6, but the last 3 to 4 years, right? And global award-winning as well. So coming back to data centers, couldn't find a co-location data center anywhere, so we built one, right? Built one for the bank. It's totally alien for me. I was CTO of criminal justice in the UK. You co-locate with key partners. I would say to the government, go and build schools, roads, invest in other infrastructure, hospitals, and so on. So you outsource. Same thing with BP, Global Applications Director. We outsourced 450 or so data centers across the world to 3 mega data centers in the US, the UK, and Singapore 20 years ago, right? So that was the context I brought to my role here. You co-locate, you don't build a data center. Put the capital where it adds significant value and is an earning asset into the front end of the business. But the situation here was different. And I then had to come to the conclusion with the Exco board and so on to spend what we spend on the data center. So we built one. We built it to a standard that it was a redefining standard of what data centers would be like in Africa, actually, because it was also the first sort of tier 3 design built and all of that. And in that, I'm in mechanical engineering and my degree. I also realized that, hey, look, you've got to get to grips with the engineering of diesel. There was hardly any utility power to give you 100% uptime because the business lives around the data center's reliability. So we did that. And fast forwarding, moving on from the bank, taking other roles, I then took on a role a couple of years after that as chief executive of Rack Center. And we then went on about building a new scale of colocation data center capability that is absolutely world-class, first to be tier 3 certified. In the bank, we built it to tier 3, but we're not a data center company. We didn't certify it to tier 3. We had ISO 27001 and all of those things, right? But in this case, we certified it, designed, and the first in Africa to be construct. So just shows you in Nigeria, we also can and do lead. And the main one, group, Benga can talk about that as well, in terms of building credible, scale, certified, reliable data center capability with all of those things that also build the ecosystems, interconnect, internet exchanges, and so on. Since then, over the last 12 years or so, we've had many other data centers come on stream to scale. MTN was one that had its own data center in Ojota at the time, an earlier player in all of this. There were some other earlier players as well. And so we've been through this journey now over the last 12 years or so. Now I've been the chief executive officer for open access data centers, so across Africa for the last 4 years now. And we've been building reliable scale knowledge. In fact, the other key thing over the time scale is we've also established a capability value chain in the country. It wasn't there. When you go back, we had to bring in a lot of capacity, scale, capability, and so on. But right now, you have companies that we've engaged with. I've been ensuring that we've coached that capability into the marketplace that can deliver the M&E capability that you require. So the whole ecosystem, the whole process of even customs knowledge here in this area. And so there's so much that's happened over the years that has put Nigeria only second to South Africa at the moment in terms of data center infrastructure scale and an ability to scale. So comments that might say, oh, do we have this capacity here and so on? We're not quite at European capacity, but we are at European quality. And as you bring in the demand side of the equation, the supply side scales to meet it. But there's enough huge supply side scale of Lagos, which has now become the digital infrastructure hub of West Africa. So that's in a way, the journey. And now we're talking about megawatts, 10 megawatts, 20 megawatts. We're building a 40 megawatts. Well, I did say 24 megawatts before, but we're now seeing AI scale and density. That means that we're actually looking for the same size of shell, significant more density, and we'll find the power. Power is a global issue right now. And those in Africa, we have gas, we have hydro, geothermal in places, but in the Lagos locale, gas is the predominant source of self-generation. Plus, working with Lagos state governments, they've devolved power infrastructure build out to the states now and so on, in terms of strategically how you build the kind of power infrastructure that powers the data centers at megawatts. At those days, if you talk about 1 megawatt, it seemed a lot. Now we talk about 10, 15, 20, 30 megawatts in Lagos, and that's not a bad thing. It'll bring in the power, leverage the gas we have, and build that infrastructure capability. So that what I've talked about, that will answer one question. Now let's go back to the other thing you talked about, but therefore the journey with the CBN. It was a significant challenge to change the mindset of banks, for instance, at the sheer thought of outsourcing their infrastructure, right? So that in itself has been a journey. Some banks have been more pioneering in choosing to do that over time. But right now, the progress that has been made is that if you're a bank and you're talking about building a data center, people look at you. In fact, the board members and so on have been so educated that if you put a few million dollars is dollars, it's this kind of equipment you buy to a board. They'll look at you cockeyed. Are you really spending the money in the right way? I mean, the whole thought of building your own data center is now totally gone. You collocate, and they're good quality collocation environments. Now, when we talk about disaster recovery, typically, with what Benga was doing at me one at the time, that myself will know if there was one leg with us, the other leg will be either say with the main one or with an MTN and so on. So the fabric and the interconnect between the data centers of disaster recovery capability locally or to connect to international has been built over the years. So you can't even say there's no maturity. There's a maturity over the years. Okay. So that's another piece. So the mindsets have changed to go into collocation and the proof of the disaster recovery. Something other a key milestone with the Central Bank of Nigeria was in engaging with the central bank in getting them to understand the quality of collocation we have, the confidence of understanding that they haven't legislated that why would you build a data center or not. But what the central bank did was to say we have collocation facilities that are tier 3 design certified as a minimum. So they said to banks, at least one leg in your digital infrastructure chain must be certified to tier 3 design. Okay, at least one leg. So really started to drive the bank to think, okay, so we'll build our collocation facility to be tier 3, not just a room with some air conditioning and really awful cabling. If you see some of the locations and some of these things that you would see, I mean, collocation data centers is the core business. They know what to do with power, what to do with mechanical, electrical, what to do with the right structured cabling to give you reliability and all of that. If you're the CTO of a bank, it's a terrible distraction. You're being distracted. Your job is not, of infrastructure is key, but you have to deliver it in a reliable way, in the most efficient way. But you see, if you're building your own data center, you're diverted into thinking about power, I remember once when I'm in the bank, my wife laughed and said, I'm director of power, because I was thinking about whether there was water in the diesel in my generator that's powering the bank's critical assets for reliability. I'm supposed to be changing and transforming the front end of the bank, the customer experience, transforming the efficiency of the bank, straight through processing, treasury systems, transformed core banking systems, making sure that you're ahead and all of that. And then suddenly you're worrying about the collocation. So now having to step up to the tier 3 standard, which banks need, it's concurrent maintainability, the infrastructure. Then the cities are having to learn about it. A terrible distraction. So that then shifts. So the CBN didn't say you have to collocate. What they said was you have to meet a certain minimum level for at least one leg of your data center infrastructure. Because you see, when your data center goes down, everything goes down, your connectivity, the bank goes down. And bankers know that as soon as something like that happens, your openness and propensity to fraud is significant. And now brings about a systemic financial industry issue with respect to risk management, fraud management, and so on. So you have to have reliable infrastructure. So I'm taking you through this history and memory lane and the rationale and the thinking of how we've really got to where we are. A fantastic level of maturity, although we're not there yet, okay? So then banks started to realize that I could just go to collocation. You pay as you go. And the competitive nature of banks and getting the capital adequacy also, and the capital adequacy limits that the CBN put in place for banks meant that instead of taking capital to put into a data center, you're a compromised CFO. If you'll be doing that, you have to put the capital in to shore up your tier 1 capital adequacy, meet the rules, and grow the bank. So there are fundamental things that have now shifted the way we've delivered infrastructure capability that's now a utility of sorts, including connectivity, interconnect, internet exchanges, delivering more efficient banking transactions that are held so locally and so on. And then the fintech aspect is not, because the fintech is not just a fintech company. It can also be the fintech component of a bank. And some of the utilities have been such that they've been, pushed to having their cloud services internationally. A lot will run in the well-known international cloud providers and so on, but they then have to have the international interconnect transit to link into those services. But that also comes out with customer experience issues because you have latency. So you have to balance the benefits of those, and you pay in dollars, right? But you see, when you look at the global banking, content cloud providers, there's so many fundamentals that have to be put in place so that there's a broader infrastructure readiness. The providers coming with their edge systems, they come in with all of the things that they call network staff and access to compute and all. They have to have these things in place first. And then they layer all the cloud services on top of that. But then they scratch their heads to say, is the end demand profile actually in there yet? How do we bring in the scale? How do we drive up the scale in the megawatts, so on? And that conversation is going. So that's the history of what we've been in from the general ecosystem infrastructure readiness we have. So you say, is this now a sovereign data play? Systemic banking system. It's all three, because I've explained those aspects of banking systemic impact, where jurisdiction, you have a choice, right, of banking supervision. You see, if you look at Europe, GDPR Europe-wide, okay, they actually focus on their sovereign data. You open in Europe, actually not even the US, right? You see what I mean? It's Europe. So if that happens, why don't we do ours in Africa as well? We're totally entitled to it. There's some very powerful compute reasons, because you have issues with latency, issues with having to pay, and you're exposed to different pricing risks elsewhere. But the other thing is also, therefore, to have locally the cloud platforms capability that will enable us support all of this stuff, right? So the situation we're now at is that the CBN, after many years, Benga and I were talking about this journey and so on, is that it was coming, it was on its way. It's just natural sovereign data rules. Do fintechs in Europe host their platforms in Africa or in Asia or not? No, it's in Europe. So there are practical reasons for it to be here. In terms of platform readiness, you could say, okay, the local cloud, we have good, credible local cloud providers, right? They've got the anchor basis in there. They bring a broader range of functionality and the kind of the technical term for software development that you would have, and platforms that allow you to migrate. They would expand those capabilities. It's a continuous innovation. But as we've shown, when you're given the opportunity to innovate, here we have the capability, the inclination to do it. The question, therefore, is the CBN has gone for this. It was a long time coming. Individuals should have been looking at their risk profiles about how they would respond to it if it came. The core infrastructure has been put in place over time, and there's a trajectory of building even broader AI-enabled, hyperscale-enabled infrastructure that's in place, where industry is investing significantly into that. So the next thing is, let's deliver to what was pretty much coming anyway, and deliver to the CBN and Directive. It improves customer experience, improves cost basis. We look at cost of power, and I can look at the per kilowatt cents cost in USD terms. If you look at the efficiency of the power utilization, efficiency of the infrastructure now, which actually determines how you draw the power, it's relatively competitive. We have to make sure that we build the gas-based scale to mean that the proportion of diesel generation we use to utility generation that we have is, as optimized as, in fact, 100% preferable. But you have IPPs that are delivering pretty much that level of reliability now. And the higher you have it, the more efficient your input costs are. So that's sort of the journey to date that we've had, that then actually has culminated in, it's not just the fintechs, the banks as well, that allows much better systemic overview. I wrote a paper, I think it was on LinkedIn for some time, but more targeted towards the South African market at the time, but is relevant to any market. You see, as you have AI now coming to impact how we do business, as we need the neo clouds bringing the AI infrastructure with the hyperscale cloud. If you're a business now thinking you're going to have your own data center, right, and so on, by the time you think that you need to scale and break down that wall and extend the facility and have it approved that you're $2, $3, $4, $5 million, because that's what it is, and it takes you 6 months, 12 months to build it, not to the standard, you're behind. You don't have agility in the business. You'll fail. Whereas your competitors go straight into colocation, they get NeoCloud GPU as a service, they're able to transform very, very quickly their business processes, hook into the fintechs, the internet exchanges. We're now in the world of the agile business, and you have to build agility into your infrastructure. And if you don't do that, you will fail. So there's a whole range of things that have now come together that makes it actually strategically the right thing for the CBN to do, to bring this the law in. And then we can look at the ability to do this by 1st of January 2027, as has been put down as the deadline separately.
Thank you so much, Doctor. It's quite comforting and reassuring to see how far we've come, and how much you and others have done to bring us here. So good stats. Were second in scale to South Africa. We're not yet at European capacity, but we're already at European quality. It's the same. Fortunately, the uptime standards globally are the same. Whether you are in the US or you're in the UK or you are in France or you're in anywhere you are, a tier 3 is a tier 3 data center. It's the same thing wherever. So thank you for that reflection. Banks, and again, it's such a lot of what you have done, bringing banks into shared infrastructure, getting banks to shared infrastructure when a lot of time they just wanted their small data centers in their facilities, but now we have come a long way. And the next person, so I'll be taking it to Dr. Yeli Okeremi, who he has come a long way. He's also been in the trenches in terms of this digital infrastructure and banking conversations from time. So, Doctor, sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. So now, coming right to you, especially you're currently CEO of Precise Financial System, but before then, a lot of people don't know that you are multiple CTOs of some of the biggest Nigerian banks. So you have seen this from time, and you see where it's going. So this CBN directive, it says that payment transaction data generated in Nigeria should be stored and managed in Nigeria from January 2027. In practical terms, as someone who has created a lot of indigenous payment products, and your former role as a bank CTO, what does it mean for banks? What does it mean for fintechs? What does it mean for payment processors and cloud providers? And what are the biggest risks? So now, please wear your banking hats, wear your bank CTO hats. You're on the other side. Now there's this policy. What would you do? What are the risks you are going to try to mitigate in this transition? Is it downtime? Is it the costs? Is it DR? Is it understanding the regulatory intent? Is it the application architecture? And what are the risks you're seeing that others should see? And how can they be mitigated?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me for this very auspicious conversation. And I think about time as well that this conversation took place. So you have spoken very well about, what banks, CTOs will do. But let me state that this directive from the CBN is for sure a compulsory thing that will definitely have happened anyways. And why do I say that? If you take a look at the way nations have operated and are operating, and take a look at even how things have evolved, there's a theory we call the resource-based theory. And that theory suggests that organizations that have more resources will do better than those that don't have more as much resources. That's the bottom line. And now the question you want to ask is, what do we consider to be resources? So before now, or well, up till now, Africa basically just does primary goods. And primary goods, if you understand it, are worthless, so to speak. The prices are not determined by us, they are determined outside, and people add value to it, and they make a lot more money and sell back to us. And people have realized today that one of the most important resources is data. And if you do not control your data and you continue to just give it out, again, what are you doing? You are back to the basics of primary products again. And that's why I said that this regulation, it's about time it took place. Is it going to cause some challenges? Perhaps. But will Nigeria and Nigerians, I absolutely have no doubt in the resilience and the capacity of Nigerian banks and fintechs to pull through. Now, just like Dr. Coker said earlier, I am one of those that welcomed him gladly to Nigeria when he first came, newly, fresh from the UK. And we did a few things. In fact, we did a lot together, and some of the things that I did together have become of national significance today. But when today we say, Yele, you have turned me to a banker. Little did we know that some of the things we were talking about at that time would become of national and even global significance today. And why am I saying all this? I'm saying there's absolutely no challenge that can rear its head that Nigerian engineers, that Nigerian bankers are not capable of solving. So I'm saying that perhaps there might be some challenges because of the time frame, whether people are going to be able to have everything 100%. We don't even need to have everything 100%. But I have certainty in my mind that we, as a country, will weather this thing through. It's time for Nigeria to domesticate its data. It's time for Nigeria to be able to use its own data appropriately. This is the world of artificial intelligence, and what artificial intelligence is thriving on is data. If you took away data, you've taken away the oxygen from AI. And if you take a look at the AI world, where is Africa on that map? And yet Africa produces enormous data to power what's going on. What's our share in the value chain? So this is important. Now you have asked me what I think the challenges may be. I will say that actually where we are going now is going back full cycle to where we started from. In the past, when I was at the bank some 35 years ago as a CIO, banks, you had to have your own, well, we call them data centers at that time. You had to have your own data center. So we managed our data centers. We had to have the skill for networking, just like Dr. Coker said. Tunde was, what did your wife call you? Minister of Power. You had to make sure that the power was available. You had to, well, whatever way we were doing disaster recovery, no matter how primitive, but we were doing it back up on tape. back up on whatever you had to do, ensure that this could work. But we had the skill. We also needed at that time to protect the networks for security, for in those days against malicious. Well, it's not as bad as it is now. It wasn't as bad, but there were malicious things, viruses at that time. So every bank needed to have a capacity to have engineers who could understand antiviruses, who understood networking significantly, to be able to ensure that the throughput was good, and who understood power sufficiently to be able to keep the bank's infrastructure running. And that's what we had to do. But what then happened is when players like Tunde came in and started building data centers, some of those skills, well, like the way we say it in Yoruba land, we started spoiling the bankers. Because then you realize that, oh, as a bank, you really don't even need all these skills, because you can use a co-location data center where you just pay for the space, and the data center virtually manages all these things for you. And then, of course, people began to say, oh, we prefer to have Azure, we prefer to have Amazon, or, the Huawei cloud, in which case we don't even want to know anything about the machine. We don't even want to know anything about power. We don't even want to know anything about protection in terms of security. We expect the data center to provide all these things for us. And in a reasonable way, the data centers have lived up to expectations significantly. But the question is, do we then think that the Nigerian data centers are unable to do this? My answer to that is an absolute no. We have sufficient skills in this country to guarantee that this would happen. Dr. Popa has spoken very well about some of the possible flashpoints in terms of particularly power. Because when you are talking about hyperscale data centers, you are talking about a whole lot of power requirements. And if you are talking about tier 3 data centers, you are talking about multiple power sources, so that you do not expect failure, except there's a computer apocalypse. And even in theory, you still want to have a way that even if the entire thing went belly up, you still want to have a disaster recovery thing. So my feeling is that as a bank, what I would be looking at today, if I were going to migrate from data or a fintech hosting my data outside Nigeria currently, maybe in some cloud infrastructure, I would just be looking at, hey, how can I get equivalently? Because let's take a look at what we call this infrastructure. It's 100% software. We talk about Azure, it's complete Microsoft technology software. We have a lot of certified Azure engineers here. The boxes are the easiest things. Essentially, you are dealing with servers here and there. We pull the servers in, we get data centers, and I think this is also going to help banks and fintechs cooperate and collaborate more. So come together, get shared data centers, and even share skills. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to have all the skills in one house. The power, security, disaster recovery. So we can decide to share these skills. 5, 6 banks, 10 fintechs can come together, in a co-location. However, the most important thing when this kind of thing happens, from my experience, and I think I have bragging rights to say I'm close to 40 years now in the industry, is the devil is in the detail. What happens on day 0 when we migrate? Because in doing this, you want to ensure that you have your legacy data completely and in an atomic manner, being able to shift to the new data center facility that you're going to be using in Nigeria without any data loss. And you want to be able to, more or less like a switch, just redirect data, redirect traffic to the new infrastructure. Now, I've described it beautifully. It sounds easy to do, but I know that it is not as easy. In fact, very recently, these things happen. We're all human. My company, we're doing some project with one of the major banks. and they were just doing some testing. And they then realized that the bank had made a mistake. In the test environment, which is supposed to be completely cordoned off from production, they just realized that somebody somewhere had done something that made it possible for your test data to go into the live system. On paper, that wasn't seen, but it happened. But the beauty is that the bank is resilient enough to quickly recognize it and fix it. So these are the kind of details that are going to happen. I have done major projects, I've done national projects in this country. When we did the NAX project, I remember when we did it in 2000 and I think it was 2006 or so. Yeah, on day one, we had serious issues. The switch came down crashing due to a minor detail. So some of these details are going to come at us. It may sound fresh on paper, but when these details come, one of the things I know is that it will test our resilience, but I am certain that we will be able to overcome these challenges. So for me, power is a challenge, but power is known. It's a known challenge already. And basically, we may not like it. It may not be good for the environment, but all of us in this room, we already know how we sort out these power problems. It may push up cost a little bit, but it still gives us the service that we are looking for. And that is where I stand. So, in my opinion, I will say that this directive has come to stay, one. Secondly, I will say that this directive is timely, two. And most importantly, I think Africa and Nigeria basically needs necessarily to take hold of its own destiny. We should be able to have our own data on our own soil. Let us be able to use our data. Let us create models so that we can even have our own local flair, our own local flavor for artificial intelligence and data mining. I think I'm going to have to stop here. Thank you very much, Timmy and the crew.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor. So it's I think it's thank you. Reassuring. It's about time this took place. And obviously, as you have said, there will be teething issues, but we trust in the maturity of the local data center and cloud environments. We trust in the maturity of banks and CTOs and fintechs and their CTOs and what they have been able to do over time. We believe that there will be collaboration. This would incentivize more collaboration between banks and fintechs themselves as they begin to share co-location facilities, and also between banks. And that's one of the advantages of this. Your customer service is local, between banks and data centers and cloud environments themselves as they resolve issues in real time. It was good to hear the humorous reference to backup on tape that banks used to do previously. We have come a long way from backup on tape. So now we're going to go right into a bit of the technical. I'm going to send this question to Benga Debiji. So for those who don't know, Benga Debiji built the first data centers for main one in Nigeria, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. He's digitally, in terms of digital infrastructure, he's number one in Nigeria, possibly in most parts of Africa. So this question, I'm sure he would do significant justice to it. So this directive, Mr. Debiji, has generated mixed reactions, right? Some say it's timely, as Mr. Dr. Okeremi and Dr. Koker have said. Others say, some of the comments we see now, the others say it's not ready and we don't have that. Based on this conversation alone, the ones who have had, this one we have had before, I hope we have been able to dispute that. But some of the concerns have been around power, around insecurity, around resilience, and others. What do you think this debate is pointing to? First, I want to really establish that we do not have a technical gap in Nigeria. But is it a technical issue, or is it more of awareness? Is it a perception issue? Is it a market confidence concern in local data centers? Mr. Gbenga.
Okay. Thank you, Timmy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Koka. Good morning, Dr. Okeremi. And thank you, Timmy, for the kind words. Yeah, it's been a while. We've been on this before, and I remember when we started this session, Dr. Koka said, "Benga, after this many years," and I remember that. We've been on this journey for so long. If you just check, some of this conversation on Google, you see that some of these things we are talking about now, particularly this regulation, is this conversation started some years back, more than 10 years ago, because we understood then that the singular regulation that brought about data center in Nigeria today, and why we are ahead of Ghana, where we're ahead of maybe Ivory Coast and a couple of other, West African region, is because of that singular action by the CBN for that shared services, infrastructure at that time. And that really, really expanded the market, created a lot of opportunities. Dr. Kuka was saying that when we started, there was no expert to be honest. There was no data center expert. There was no BMS expert. Nobody understand what DCIM, was. But then we built, the capacity from ground up. We had, to forcefully train people. We learned over the years. You made mistake, burn your fingers. And over the time, today we have infrastructure that competes with any global standard. And I remember that I was in, I think Dr. Koka was also there, but I don't know whether you listened to one conversation sometimes ago in Monaco at one conference, this Data Cloud Africa that we used to. And somebody was saying that I was exiting the room, and somebody looked back and said, for instance, in Nigeria, there is no any data center, there is no standard data center. And when you hear something like that, I turned back, I was like, oh, you mean? But today the story is different. Now, so when you look at it, what are the issues that people are looking at? People are looking at, okay, are we there, where we need to be? Do we have everything? Let me say that, number one, CBN, that I know, because we also did some audits, through proxy. For some, CBN has been auditing the data centers for like more than 10 years now, or about 8 years that we know. And they audit this infrastructure through the banks. So every bank, year on year, they audit, because after that mandate that you must be in a co-located data center. So they then ask you where you located, and they audit on their own. They on their own do an independent audit of all these data centers. Now, don't forget that these are mandatory requirements from the CBN. Now, on their own, they were checking. Now, these data centers are also certified to 27001, 9001, PCI DSS, ISO, and a couple of other certifications. So, in terms of the standard across the world, the standards are the same. So, looking at the infrastructure we have today, I can say that, yes, we have what it takes. Now, what are the concerns of people that are raising this concern? People are talking about power. Everybody that have spoken before me have said it. Power, we know what the challenges are. We've been able to design our own method, our own processes and procedure around the power. And I can tell you for free, today, you possibly have people that understand how to engineer resilience in power in Nigeria much more than you have in the US. You can quote me. You know why? Because a US engineer is looking at a generator as a backup. He's looking at the mains when he's designing, looking at generator as a backup. He's designing this generator not to run for more than 2 hours, 3 hours, make the maximum of like 24 hours in a day in case something happens, right? In Nigeria, we understand that, look, when you have the mains, it's like a luxury. So we design our resilience around even the generator, making backup, control, the kind of control you have on the issue of the generator. So you've never seen any data center since the last 10 years that has gone down because of generator or anything. There could be issues, there could be some other issues, but not on power. So if anybody is raising, oh, do we have enough power? Yes, we don't have power at the grid, but the data center operators, they understand, what power really, really means to data center. And they've been able to engineer around that. So that's number one. The issue of resilience is built today in Lagos, for instance, across multiple data centers. When you look at the traditional data centers, traditional banks today, they have either maybe they have primary, they run their primary from one data center and run disaster recovery from another data center. We never encourage anybody to have your two legs in one data center. That is not done. So when you're talking about geographical redundancy, you already have it. Some people have, one leg on the mainland, they have the second leg on the island and things like that. The same thing happens, or the same thing will happen to this payment service bank, and the fintech that we're talking about. We don't expect that somebody will have his primary and the secondary in the same data center. So what we're saying is that you have your cloud, in one hardware in one data center, you have the other one in another data center. That gives you the kind of resilience that you're talking about. People are also talking about security. When you say security, how secure is your data center in Dubai? How secure is your data center in London? We've seen it now that, when we market Nigeria, to favor some other countries, we find out that there's nobody, there's no way. In fact, Nigeria is possibly even more secure than a lot of these other countries that we are looking at. And we've seen examples. I don't want to give we know examples in recent time. Now, when you are talking about cybersecurity, that's physical security. If you're talking about cybersecurity, the distance between US and Japan is the same thing as the distance between here and Benin Republic when it comes to cyber, because it's IP. So if somebody is going to hack you in Nigeria, he's going to hack you in the US, and it's the same thing. And it's a function of how, the kind of, security firewall that you built across your network. And that is not localized to maybe the US or in Europe and all that. We have very good cybersecurity experts in Nigeria here who understand the threats that the Nigerian system face and able to design the network or firewall, for that. So for me, when you look at some of these arguments, I don't think they really have substance. Sometimes it could also be that some of these fintech are looking at when you say something is now regulated, or when the regulator comes into an environment, then fees, the idea of fees, begin to show up. When you are not doing anything, you are penalized, and then everybody's looking at, okay, see, now that these people are looking at opportunities that is in the fintech now, because really the fintech is also, regulations has also, helped the fintech, the fintech industry. Now about in 2024, I think they processed about, I can't remember again, maybe like 18 trillion naira or something like that. Something very, very huge, right? Starting, when you look at 10.7 that they did in 2023. So that's a lot of, so people may be thinking that, oh, now that they are putting a torchlight on this, now there's going to be penalties, they're going to be, but we should look away from that. And I also feel that the CBN is not bringing this, which is from what I've seen. I don't think the CBN is bringing all these things, because they want to penalize somebody or because the CBN wants to make money off the fintech. CBN understand what data, and Dr. Okiremi mentioned it. CBN understand what data is. And when we're talking about national security, you cannot talk about national security when your data, when you are not in control of your data, when you put your data in the hand of somebody, including the control. We already know what Google, Facebook, and a lot of the social media, we know that a lot of social media data that we have is in the hands of these people. There's nothing you can do. But should we also then handle all our payment systems and, payment transaction and everything, into the hand of, other people? So I think this infrastructure, number one, I want to believe that the Nigerian system, the Nigerian data center are ready for this. In terms of capacity, the capacity is there. Let's even look at how much the fintech, let's even look at how many servers, what is the story, what is the capacity that we're talking about. There are data centers, on the mainland today. There are data centers on the island. There are data centers that are currently being built. In the next 3 or 4 months or 6 months, possibly, you have more than possibly maybe 10 megawatts, that could be added to existing infrastructure that have been commissioned. So if we're talking about, maybe we don't have enough, what is the size of this, capacity that we're talking about? And can we, be bringing them? And let the issue then be that, we have the data, we don't have enough capacity. That is where the investment then will come in. People will then invest in infrastructure. They will bring in, FDI will bring, to come. And don't forget also that the likes of Amazon, the likes of AWS, Microsoft, and all the likes. CBN is not saying that you can only just patronize the local hosting. CBN is saying that let the data be in Nigeria. And as I speak with you today, we also know that a lot of these guys, they are in Nigeria. They have trusted the Nigerian platform to the extent that they have what they call availability zone in Nigeria. It's just because the data that they're processing in Nigeria has not really, it's not so much to acquire more space within the data center that we have. So what CBN is saying that bring all the data and bring the AWS, bring Microsoft, Azure, everybody, let them come and rent space in our data center and host the data here. And I think it's going to be to the benefit of everybody. There's going to be a lot of jobs. I know people that have been talking to me in the last 2 weeks about, from outside the country. So what can we do in Nigeria? What is this saying now? Can we begin to look at opportunities? They are already having conversations with cloud service provider in Nigeria. Those skills are going to come back. All the people that Japa will now Japada, if you want to put it that way, they will come back. Even the issue of the forex that we're talking about today, there's a lot of, so the fintechs that we're talking about, they pay a lot of money, to host all these things. Now you can pay in Naira, so you are not also under pressure, for forex, and you're looking for forex and all that. So I think some of the issues that people are raising in summarizing, some of the issues that people are raising are really not, they are baseless, to be honest. I think there is the fear of maybe the CBN is now going to be making money, because once you say regulation, then control, and then you have issue of money. I think CBN should not look at, because once regulators begin to look at revenue, then there is a problem. I think we should look at this objectively. We should look at the regulation. We should look at the power that this gives to Nigeria and Nigerians. And I think everybody should cooperate with the regulation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gbenga. And I think I like that clarity you provided, that we're not saying that do not patronize AWS. What we're saying is the AWS you're patronizing, let it be. Let your data be in AWS in Nigeria. Unfortunately, we have a lot of these companies who have, they may not have full regions, but some of them have cloud zones and so on in Nigeria. And also liked that you pointed out CBN has been auditing. And again, this regulation by CBN is and it continues CBN's leadership in financial services, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. They have been auditing data centers for years. They have been ensuring that they check the capability of a data center. And you have mentioned some of those things that all data centers must have: PCI DSS, ISO certifications, tier 27,000 and so on, tier 3, tier 4. We even have tier 4 certifications in Nigeria. It's the same across the world. And also, I like the point you brought up about resilience. And resilience in data centers where you have primary in one place and you have secondary in another place. And thank you. These arguments that people are saying, we need to really, really demystify these myths. We don't have power issues that we haven't resolved. And I especially like that point you mentioned, that data centers in Nigeria now, engineers in Nigeria probably can engineer more resilience better than others across the world, because we have dealt with the problems firsthand. We have problems that they haven't seen. And I think that was a very strong point. I want to stay with you for a bit. So you have visited quite a lot of data centers across the world. I know we also did a Terraco visit to South Africa a few years ago. So you have visited a lot of data centers. Do we have in Nigeria standard data centers comparable to the rest of the world, capable of hosting these workloads? Yes, we have heard we have heard earlier how the speakers have said yes, we have, but I want to hear from you compared to what you have seen in other parts of the world. Do we have standard data centers in Nigeria capable of handling these workloads? And then, based on what you see, you have talked a bit about similarities that you have seen with technical requirements for data centers in Nigeria compared to the rest of the world. Similarities, everybody has PCIe DSS, everybody has tier 1, tier 3, tier 4, and so on. What are some of the differences that you see? And then, what must exist, what infrastructure must exist in Nigeria for data localization to be credible?
Thank you, Timmy. All right. So let me start from the first one. Data center in Nigeria compared to data center in other places. For context, and so that people can also quote me. Yes, and maybe for the purposes of people that are online. I visited data center in the US, a couple of states in the US. Amazon, not Amazon data center, IBM data centers. Cisco data center, Central Cisco data center in the US. Don't let me mention so many. Then co-location data center in South Africa and all that. And it was after those visits that we came back to Nigeria to say, hey, look, so let us now design. Because when the idea of building MDXI came in, we said, look, how do we do this? What do we need to do? And a couple of, here and there, consultants saying so and so. So we needed to have a very good understanding of, this system, how it works, and how regulation in each of those countries affect the design of data centers. So we decided to take this long trip, understanding exactly how this thing works. And then we came back here, understanding those things, that work in the US, how the US availability of power and things like that. And we came here in Nigeria to design what we have, today. And I think the same goes for, Rack Center and some of those other data centers, that are currently running. So in terms of the standard are the same, just like you said. If a data center is certified to tier 3, there's no Nigerian tier 3 or UK tier 3, is tier 3. And there are basic standards, especially when you have what we call TCCF, Tier Certification of Constructed Facilities. When you design your data center, Uptime will certify it. They will look at it. They will check your resilience, component resilience, capacity equipment, line equipment, check all those things, cable, bus bars, and see, and do a kind of a simulation, CFD analysis. They do all kinds of desktop stuff to see. Now, when you finish your design and you have the load, they come back again to come and test all those things. And once you have a tier 3 or tier 4 TCCF, Tier Certification of Constructed Facility, it means that all those resilience or component, reliabilities or whatever that you have put on paper has been tested on real life load, simulate the heat, simulate the power, simulate everything, and ensure that this thing can pass before you get. So when you say standard, in terms of standard, yes, we have standard, and I don't want to market any data center, but there are data centers in Nigeria today that people know that are certified and they are of the same quality standard. Now, let me add also that on top of that standard, sometimes Tier 3 specify 99.985, whatever. Don't let me go into those technical details. But what it means that you're only allowed to have maybe 20 minutes of downtime in a whole year. The Nigerian data center power system, a good number of them have been engineered to have 100% year on year. Because then we have a backup of a backup because of the understanding of our own peculiar environment. And our standard operating procedures, SOP, were designed because we know that we can actually run generator for 8 days, 9 days without even grid collapse. So if a hurricane or something will happen in Nigeria and power fails, it will affect more data center in Nigeria, in the US and in UK, that it will affect data center. And I'm talking from experience because I've also interacted with, international design standard, and then, people who operate data center outside Nigeria and what they see, the capacity of what generators should be for different type of data centers and capacity. Having said that, so we have data centers. Our data centers are on the same standard. Now, let's talk about scale. Standard are the same. And the evidences are there by those certifications. When you talk about the scale, of course, we have more scale outside Nigeria. I visited data center that in one building you have 7 megawatts. In Nigeria today, we don't have a workload. We have data centers that are built, that are designed, for that. But today we don't have such a workload, that say, a 7 megawatt or a 10 megawatt in one building. So when you're talking about scale, we have those scales. But this is the thing that will bring the scale, and that's what we're talking about. That, look, If we continue to say this thing, we're writing in the papers, we are talking about it. If there is no strict regulations to enforce this this data localization, then we will never get there, and we'll be, playing in the hand of people. Now, the difference that I have seen from data center to data center, they are, what do we have in the data center? You have power, you have cooling, you have real estate. Every other thing that come inside it, maybe you then have security, different layers of security, physical security, you architect your own access control and other procedures and things like that. Those are the things that you have in the data center. And you engineer your data center, based on the environment where you are. Let me also say, in the Nordics, data center maybe in Sweden or in Norway or in other places, maybe even in Canada, they have operational advantage better than us because they are able to do what we call free cooling. So during the winter, they are able to, you don't need to put on this thing, you just you have something that brings in the cold air, you filter it, pass through your servers and all that, and then you can use the heat to do some other things. So which brings their operational cost down. Now, this may also be one of the reasons why some of the fintech are saying we want to host, because sometimes when you look at some of these things, and because they are also building at scale, when you build at scale, the cost per unit is possibly lower. So some of this pushback may not be unconnected also, maybe with pricing and all that stuff. But we're saying that when we bring all those data into Nigeria, we'll also then have the scale, and then we'll be able to also lower the price, because a lot of the data center today are running maybe 50 racks, 70 racks, and you need one engineer. People still have to run shift. Generator will still have to run. So the operational cost is not necessarily lower than what we're supposed to do when you are running that scale. So the third question, quickly, before I give this thing to the others. Sorry, I think I missed the third question. What did you say?
I think you have what infrastructure must exist for data localization in Nigeria to be credible?
So to be credible, I don't think there is anything that must exist that is not currently in existence. Let's look at power. We talk about it. And we have our own way of generating the power and not even relying on the grid. The grid becomes, if it happens, it's an advantage. We talk about security. Nigeria is basically, we don't fight anybody, nobody fights us. We don't have hurricane, we don't have some of these, we don't have tsunami, we don't have, so when you're looking at natural, disasters and all that, we don't have. We've also been able to build skills over the years. I mentioned the first time that when we started, there were no data center experts. Today, surprisingly, if you put an advert, you're looking for data center, you have very, very, very qualified people in Nigeria today. So in terms of capacity for the hosting itself, we have so many data centers today that are crying for workload. That they are there. So capacity is there, human resources is there, we have. And if the workload that is coming becomes so high, then we scale up just like we scale up before. A good number of the people we train also, they've gone out of the country. They are even the ones supporting some of this infrastructure outside the country. Some of them want to come back. A good number of Nigerians want to actually work in Nigeria when these opportunities are created. So I don't think there is anything today that we need to have that is not available. I think it's this regulation, what everybody's been asking for. And it's a good thing that is happening today and it's coming at this time. And I think everybody should just look at it and we should embrace it. And let's go into it and let's see whatever comes out of it in terms of, we need to scale up. There will be investment. People are already looking for how to invest in Nigeria to scale up those infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And it's good to hear your thoughts on how this is actually what brings scale. A lot of the times, so Zalam Analytics, GZB, they continue to do a lot of great work around what data centers we have on the continent, how many megawatts. But really, until we stimulate demand with policies like this, we're not going to get anywhere. And this really is one of the most important signals that the CBN has put out. And again, other countries are watching this. So we have other countries on this call who are also watching. and are seeing how Nigeria is navigating this. So, Dr. Koke, I want to come to you now. So you have an interesting technology background. You have worked across multiple continents. Your most recent role, long time ago, was Group CTO of Access, one of the biggest banks in Africa. And then now you have crossed the digital infrastructure and data center side. So you can wear both hats. For banks, now imagine I'm going to throw a similar question to what we had Dr. Okeremi address. So now, what should banks, how should banks and fintechs assess local data center readiness across some of these things that we have highlighted: power, reliability, certifications, PCI DSS, and so on, resilience, capacity, availability, interconnection, and DR. If you were advising a bank CTO, what would you advise him to look for? And great that we heard that CBN has been auditing data centers for a while. What minimum infrastructure standards should regulated institutions look out for? Because today is CBN, but we expect that other industries are also taking note. So we expect similar regulations in oil and gas. We expect similar regulations in manufacturing. We expect similar regulations across. So those questions are for you, sir.
Okay, the issue actually isn't data centers. We've got the data center infrastructure there. It's proven. Banks have been, and enterprises and corporates and cloud have been running successfully, 100% uptime and all of that, you see. And when you come about scale, okay, the way it works across the world is you don't just go and build a shell that's 150, 100 megawatts, right? You've got to deploy capital very carefully in a strategic, deliberate way. Is that there are ways you expand in phases. So you could say I'm talking about a 30 megawatt data center that is the expandable progress we're going through right now, AI ready, cloud, all of that kind of stuff. But we're not just going to plonk out 30 megawatt shell out there and fill it up. It's because it takes time. However, you need to be able to respond to the lead times for your mechanical and electrical. It can be quite substantial. So you align it. We have global relationships with the global providers of this infrastructure, building more capacity capability locally, and all of that. We know what it takes to bring in capacity, and that's done, that's given. It's what happens in the whole world. We have the world-class human capability and the designs and stuff like that. So when you have I put my hat, corporate CIO hat on now, one of the very key things I want to understand is what services do the cloud providers have locally? Something also happens where you look at the banks and the fintechs. There are pure play fintechs. There are fintechs that are sort of hybrid to banks, right? And core banks that have fintech play. So there's a mix of the business models that they have, right? What you find quite often with the providers is they go into cloud, global cloud, and as they scale, their transaction starts to go up. They start to two things. They pay in USD, right? There are many things related to world of currencies, and we can't exclude ourselves really for that. It's the reality, but you operate and you acquire your scale in the currency of the market you're in. It's so typical, but it's cushioned in a way in terms of how that happens from a currency point of view. So they start to see that scale go up, and they have a real dollar exposure on the balance sheets. Out of their control, stuff happens, but also as they scale, they start to incur increasing costs. And then they start to think, oh, perhaps I need to move some of this into my own infrastructure and have a hybrid. And then they start to think, okay, perhaps they'll have a hybrid located in a data center here, or they might have a hybrid with the cloud provider here and the international cloud provider. So there's a mix of how they choose to architect. Of course, CBN is very, very conscious of risk, operational risk exposures, and so on. And they won't put something in place where they feel that, organizations or platforms that they regulate are exposed to inordinate operational risk or other commercial risk for that matter. It can bring systemic issues. So they've looked at that. The data centers are there. The key thing you then need to think about, and I see that we have, perhaps some migration so specialists here, is we've migrated colocation from on-prem into data centers without downtime. There's a way you do it. We know how to do it. We know how to advise the CIOs in these companies that this is how you do it. One of the things I found a benefit is that running it like a data center company, having been a CIO, I can just empathize with what you need to do from a risk management point of view, migration uptime, some management point of view. So the engagement is very, very kind of proactive in that way. It's not just about colocation, it's about the partnerships that help you succeed. So they have to think about these things on a risk-based migration process. And there are migration experts. How do you shift your workload back down to cloud platforms that are here? You need to think about your the risk to uptime, how you phase it, interconnectivity, all of those things, your backup plans and everything. No doubt the CBN will also be interested in that, the fact that these risk managed migration processes are in place properly. You also need to make sure that the cloud providers that you'll be working with will have the right kind of containers and stuff, software platforms that you'd want to use, and you test it. So there's work immediately with urgency that has to go on with respect to going through the entire migration process and getting that migration in place. And of course, there'll be backup plans, right? Now, if the issues that have to be taken to the CBN outlining migration risk, operational risk at the time, and it's totally planned and it's shown, it'll be given good hearing because, the central bank is a very proactive, engaged regulator, right? And you have to go through all of those processes, get your migration in place, and make sure that you're able to operate without downtime. There are many fintechs that actually operate in Nigeria right now. Okay, so it's not something totally new, right? The other thing that this triggers is the demand side dynamics. The global cloud platform providers will now start to see that there's a shift in a huge environment of consumption in Nigeria, right? And it'll make them feel that they should start to bring more functionality here because some of those cloud providers that are here, AWS is well known, has a local zone at Rack Center. They'll probably be looking at how they pull down some functionality beyond, say, edge functionality into substantive processing functionality, Huawei Cloud in the region, other cloud providers, Google Cloud Platform, and so on. They'll be proactively looking at the fact that the demand side dynamics are changing. You're right. It's not just about banking. This is now going to drive something else to, let's say, oil and gas, for instance. The oil and gas conferences recently, there's a total change of dynamism. It's a transformation in that industry right now. A lot of this is going to also be driven by technology infrastructure, and so on. They will start to look at that. Manufacturing companies are complaining that they're on ERP systems that are latency compromised. Okay? They want it to perform more. And these companies are now going to start to think that, okay, you either lose the business or you bring your workload down to Nigeria. As those demand side dynamics change, it propels us on the supply side to make sure we now trigger even quicker those expansion plans we have in place already. because there'll be an alignment between it. And that's what you're going to now be seeing with the CIOs that have to think about this stuff and how they will properly deal with migration risk assessment or migration phasing to manage that risk. There's something I've been talking about for some time. One, we talk about power as if we're the only ones with power problems. We're not. It's a global problem, right? It's a great leveler. Data center leadership and executives look at power as a core competence. You understand the strategy of power, the demand of power, where your power sources, the fuel sources are going to come from the type, making sure that it's as sustainable as possible. And this is just day to day. This is just daily sort of stuff of how we have to run our businesses, right? And the knowledge we have to have. And everyone in the world is thinking the same thing. It's actually an advantage for us now because since the power is a leveler in the world, we can actually drive scale, and that's happening. Nigeria's DC build out scale. I can see some analysts in the list of listeners is trajectory towards South Africa, right? And I've spoken about this for some time. That trajectory is important. If you look at the internet exchange throughput. Okay, Nigeria and South Africa stand out from the entire rest of the continent by leaps and bounds. It's not just a little bit ahead of the next country. It's multiples. Okay, South Africa is around about 5 terabits and growing there. Nigeria is now around about 2.5. With the internet exchange capacity. But I always say to people, look beyond the absolute, look at the trajectory. The trajectory around Lagos especially is significant. With all the subsea cables that we have, now we have cable capacity. Do you know when the cable cuts happened and the resilience of some of the infrastructure that we have in this country? When the cable cuts happened in Côte d'Ivoire, right, we were able to bring to play Equiano capacity within the data center to bring in resilience, right? And restoration to capacity that would have gone elsewhere. The entire industry came together, worked together, and we had subsea capacity that made sure Nigeria actually fared pretty well, very well actually compared to anybody else. And then we had capacity that took us down to South Africa that gave that resilience. Now we have 2 Africa as well that's gone live in Lagos and Kwaibo, okay, that brings other additional infrastructure and resilience to what we have here. So those things are actually pushing Lagos towards the capacities that you'd have in Joburg and Cape Town. I think it'll trend towards Cape Town first and towards Joburg, and that's good capacity. If you compare the internet exchange capacity to the next one in line, I think is Kenya. I'm not, but the multiples about 3-fold to 4-fold the capacity increase that you're seeing. Okay, so the fundamentals are here. And we see it as an opportunity to bring in gas-based power generation. Some of it is IPP, some of it is going to be captive power build, some of it is going to be mixed with utilities, some of it is going to be data centers, more located where some of these things are happening that will drive the scale. So I see it as an opportunity. And Lagos in Nigeria has significant geophysical scale that pairs well with South Africa and will pair well with the UK. So in that way, it's actually a benefit for fintech companies to have to bring their capacity back here, the infrastructure is there. Finally, the other thing I've been saying is that capacity substitution. Since power is a problem, getting space is a problem with AI growth that we're seeing in Europe. What's going to happen? You're going to scratch your head and think about all these fintechs and all the oil and gas companies and so on that have workload running in UK or Dutch or, data centers. They're going to think, okay, we need to take away some of this capacity to Africa, where there's a capacity availability, power, gas, and stuff like that. So we can make space for growth for what Europe needs. So I call that capacity substitution. And you're going to start to see that the global players will see that as something they have to take into account. The CBN regulation assists that. Other regulatory shifts that will happen in line with what CBN is doing happens, suddenly it triggers that capacity substitution, and we should see that scale growth happen. But we're ready to do it. We have, global players here, we have local players here, we have Pan-African players here, able to bring that capacity in. We have data centers here that have won global awards in the same global platforms that these other data centers are in. We've won the same awards, right? We have individuals that have won alongside global engineers and so on that have won global awards. So the data center readiness is not the issue. And as I've said, we then need to just layer up some of those things. And as a CIO, I'll look at what's the risk-based migration process I need to put in place very, very, very quickly indeed.
Thank you, Doctor. And as you've said, obviously, this circular and what will come after this will trigger demand side dynamics in Nigeria with some of those skills that we have alluded to. And then hyperscalers now begin to bring more functionality into the continent, not just edge. There are many other things. They can set up full cloud regions in Nigeria
Yes.
and across.
You see, a lot of that edge stuff's been, what I'm saying, the fundamentals have been being layered on over time. Okay.
Yeah.
And some of these edge locations have disaster recovery around here as well in 2 or 3 data centers. You can just talk around it because you can't mention but by and large, the fundamental layers of interconnect, exchange, connectivity, edge locations, pairing DRs, they've been put in place. You can just layer the workload that you need on top of it. And we'll figure out how we get the power. It's a common problem across the world.
Thank you. And the capability of this as a domino effect to really impact and scale up everything is just very, 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 very interesting. So
it's a challenge, but we'll step up to it.
Definitely. I want to stay on this challenge theme, Doctor. So CBN has set a January 2027 deadline. I know that from shared cloud, shared hosting to now, we have come a long way. But do you think that this timeline is feasible for everyone, or do you think the readiness will vary across the banks, the fintechs, and so on?
Yeah, I think readiness will vary depending on the architecture they have right now. And that's why I mentioned the fact that, once you look at what you have to do, your risk profiling and the likely platforms, that has to happen very, very quickly. Then the migration risks, the timelines will be taken into account. Look, the movement has happened. The question, therefore, is what's the risk and feasibilities of getting in on time? And no doubt that would have been considered in the timeline of the circular that was set out.
Thank you, Doctor. I want to come to Mr. Digbiji. So, we have discussed the directive, we have discussed the infrastructure, we really know that now we have the infrastructure, we have the skills, we have the talents, we have discussed the operational concerns, we have discussed the market gaps, we have gone into everything. I want us to do a bit of practical recommendations now, as we close this session. What are the key issues that the CBN should clarify on the directive? What should they explain? Because a lot more, I think this session has provided a lot more insight into the fact that CBN is actually doing a great job. This is required now, and local data centers, the local industry is able to and willing to really take up this role, because they have been doing it. We've heard on this call that we've had data centers in Nigeria that have not had a downtime in 10, 11, 12 years, right? These data centers are comparable to any in the rest of the world. So from a CBN perspective, what key issues do you think they should begin to clarify? And then, as the industry, financial services and infrastructure ecosystem begin to look together towards the January 2027 deadline, what actions should we take within the next 90 days ahead of January 2027 as the digital infrastructure ecosystem in Nigeria and also as the financial services ecosystem in Nigeria? What should we do within the next 90 days?
Okay, thank you very much, Timmy. So let me take the second question first. I think in terms of what we should do as an industry, I think we need to do this kind of education. I think the maybe using African Data Center Association, or maybe because we don't have, maybe the Nigerian chapter of African Data Center Association need to come together. I think they need to put a kind of I don't know what platform. Maybe they have to be like maybe like an organized event where the fintechs, the banks, and all that can actually talk directly to the operators so that some of their fears can be allayed, right? So they need to let them also know in terms of education what is available, because it's not impossible that some of this fintech, don't forget that the traditional banks, today, they are already enjoying this. They are enjoying colocation, just like Dr. Kuka said. Some of them now will not even ever again think about, looking at diesel generator for their, data centers and things like that. They've gone beyond that. So, and today, and a lot of them also, through NIPS, they actually exchange, when you go to a GTB app, you use your app, you transact business with FCMB and all that stuff. All those transactions are happening in Nigeria today using the existing data centers that we are talking about. So I think there has to be, number one, there has to be some level of awareness and education so that the fintechs who are, born in the cloud, kind of, because when they were setting up, they didn't have any legacy equipment. They were born in the cloud. And so maybe they are not too aware of what we have. There has to be that level of education. Number two, I think the CBN also need to do some clarification. Today, when anybody hear regulator, the fear is money, fee, penalties and things like that. I think the CBN needs to come clear to let everybody understand that, look, this is not about making money to the CBN post or in. This is what we want to do. I also think that, which I know that CBN giving 6 months doesn't mean that, okay, after 6 months, when there is a genuine reason why somebody is not able to migrate the whole of the data, CBN will say, oh no, then you can no longer operate. No, I don't think so. I think this thing is given, this timeline, this very strict timeline is given so that people will scale up and they will speed up whatever they need to do to be able to. Otherwise, the same way we've been talking about it in the last 10 years, we'll still be talking about it. So I think CBN will be reasonable enough to say that, look, if there are genuine reasons why somebody is not able, but you have to be seen to be doing something. And I remember that in the shared services, there were times when the industry have to ask, the bank have to say, please give us time because we needed to do this. And then today, any bank today they are enjoying the facilities and enjoying the services and the benefits today. So I think those are the three areas I can think of. One other thing that we didn't really talk about, and Dr. Kuka mentioned it very briefly, is connectivity. Because somebody will be asking, somebody in the audience will be thinking about, oh, for data center to talk to each other, then you need connectivity. Absolutely correct. But all the data centers that we have in Nigeria today are connected. High-speed fiber, alternative route. I know I don't want to mention data center. There are 2 or 3 data centers that I know that is almost like 3 levels of connections that you have in between them. So the resilience is already built when it comes to that. And I also know that some other new data center will spring up. Thank God for the Project Bridge, which we are part of. Government is building, or government is laying the foundation very soon for a resilient network across Nigeria. So it will no longer be data centers in Nigeria. There will be data centers in Port Harcourt where we can take advantage of, gas that is available that is currently being wasted or fled. So people can build hyperscale data center for AI workloads and things like that. There will be data center in Abuja. There will be data center in Katsina and in Kano, and all those will have, the necessary connectivity so that there will be evenly distribution of this facility across the country. So I feel that those are the areas that I think we need to. Education is one. So in terms of awareness, so everybody understand what we need to do. Then there should also be discussions around even the capacity that is required, because if anybody, we've talked about the physical infrastructure that is available. So if Microsoft is going to come to Nigeria, they're going to upscale what they have in Nigeria. Don't forget that there is going to be maybe, if there is more hardware required to come and co-locate in here, there's going to be manufacturing of those hardware because they are not off the shelf, right? There's going to be bringing those things, clearing, installation, physical installation before configuration. Those are the questions that we need to begin to have, so that individual operators can then begin to ask questions. How much capacity do I need to put in place in terms of my floor space, in terms of my cooling space, which, like Dr. Kuka said, a good number of those things. I don't think there is anything that we require today that is not physically present, but can we bring them to service, and how quickly? Do we need to work on 3 months? Do we need to look at 6 months and things like that? Those are the things, those are the conversations I think we should be having.
All right, thank you, sir. So yes, so obviously, and you've noted a good point on awareness and market education, and definitely a lot of work is going to be done on that. We're working on that. We should also have, I think we'll have a closed door meeting at some point. I think that will be announced shortly. You have also mentioned a good point about CBN should also clarify financial intent around this, and obviously you landed on how an ongoing Project Bridge will also significantly improve resilience and connectivity and interconnections really across the country. I want to ask the same question to Dr. Coker. So you have obviously have been engaging the CBN on some of this. What are some of the things they should clarify, and what actions now should be taken ahead of January 1, 2027, aside what Mr. David has said?
It's not just the circular comes out and then that's it. No dialogue, no interactions. Typically, over the years, where you get a circular like this, you act. You don't start by saying no, right? I think your engagement with the regulator in a proactive way is the beginning of wisdom, right? I have experienced it, having operated in the environment. However, what happens, and this is where the interactive leadership comes in with intent, is there might be certain aspect with some long lead things that you might need to look at and get into discussion with. And that's perfectly okay. But you do it with fact, but having done your homework, not just to respond by saying, no, it's not possible. It doesn't go down. It wouldn't go down well. So the key thing for companies that go after that is assess exactly what choices. I've already had some questions come through to me to say, okay, who are the cloud providers that you work with, and what are the kind of architectural possibilities? And I give a view. So some of that is already starting to take off. But the more time you spend figuring out and scratching your head, the more time you lose in being in delivery mode to do your architecture. In fact, you see, one thing I said earlier is this has been quite some time coming. And if you do not have your plan B or when something like this comes in place and how you execute it, you've missed something. So you really need to assess very, very quickly and not be seen as to have been caught napping where risk assessments would have seen. I mean, Benga and I looked at this. This is from years. This is from years and years of some time coming, of fundamental infrastructure being in place, the interconnect ecosystems being in place, data center capacity of the high quality, proven, and all of that. I think some people talk, sort of question about some investors insist on processing being held elsewhere. Investors just want the fact that the platforms work, they have good client experience, they get the returns on the investment, they operate in line with the regulatory operating environment that is in place anyway. The central bank didn't just become the regulator of these companies just like that. It's so you invest in a company where you understand what the supervisory and the regulatory environment is. I always try to highlight to people there's supervision and there's regulation, okay, and the interplay between both. Investors understand this. So the key thing, therefore, is to get into action, understand what your choices are, the landscape. Typically, if you've been on top of it in terms of risk assessment, the possibilities, the likelihood of this coming to happen anyway, you already have and been on top of your choices. In the absence of that, get on top of it, understand the choices, understand what the likely requirements are for migration, the architecture that's required. As Benga said, it may mean that you may actually need some equipment that now have long lead deliveries. Well, get the evidence, show the architecture, and get into authentic discussion rather than starting the process by saying, no, it's too soon. And then out of that comes what would be the feasibility. But then there's certain things that you need to start doing. You've initially put and shift your interconnect point, anchor point into a local DC. So immediately you get that on domain, right? And you're paired as you need to do to make sure that your compute might be elsewhere, but you're now starting to shift the anchor point of your infrastructure. It's not just about the raw data, it's about the infrastructure you put in place. And then you risk protect it to make sure you can in a way dual operate, in a way understand how you get a data migration, where your compute is. All of that depends on the bank's architecture. What is held where? What is hooked into the bank? Is it a pure play fintech? Are you light on interconnect processing for transactions? Or do you have an account carrier? There are some banks here that are account carriers for the fintechs, although the actual app processing is elsewhere. You have fintechs now that are actually Pan-African. That need to operate in a Pan-African way, and they now need to think about what impact that has on their architecture. There will be other regulatory domains that they operate in as well. So these are the things that have to be taken into account to map out your roadmap for a risk managed migration, to make sure that sovereign data is held within the country, and you distribute your processing in the best way to optimize the kind of processing architecture that you have.
Thank you, Doctor. So to continue this train of thoughts, and this is our last question before we go into a short Q&A. Fortunately, we have had some questions, but we've already been answering those questions as we have been speaking. So this question, and then we'll also go to Mr. Digbiji in about 2 minutes. If this directive is implemented well, what could it unlock for Nigeria's digital economy beyond compliance? In terms of, well, I've spoken a bit of this thing, but I want to close out with something that our listeners can live with. Okay. What will it unlock in terms of local cloud demand, in terms of AI readiness, in terms of even capital staying in country? You hear numbers about how, I think I heard something about how Nigeria spends, is it billions of dollars annually on all these things, really. What will it unlock in terms of resilience, financial resilience? What will it unlock in terms of sovereign infrastructure? What will it unlock in terms of Nigeria as a regional cloud leader. So Dr. Kroka and then Benga answer those questions in about 2 minutes.
Okay, so I already talked to it in terms of infrastructure, the trajectory. It will bring scale because the cloud providers need to scale, they take more data center space, and so on. And it'll enhance the Lagos status as that digital infrastructure hub, right? But very quickly, in terms of value add, I've said this before, so it just be a reminder. Typically, say a megawatt is a round number, about $10 million. So if you do 10 megawatts, say $100 million. Analysis has shown that the director induced impact could be, say, 50-fold. So if you have $100 million you spend, impact could be 5 billion in an economy. And then you're generating an interconnect environment, whereas in Project Bridge, 90,000 kilometers, the WIRE's building its own open access networks and getting connectivity out there to the eyeballs. 10% extra broadband penetration, it's another, say, 2 to 2.5% or more, actually, by the International Telecoms Union. These are sort of validated things. Now, when you bring that together with Directive like this, right? Imagine the economic impact that it has. So something like this is also fundamental to the goal of creating a $1 trillion economy. And these are one of those enabling infrastructure plays that will drive progress towards that kind of $1 trillion economy target.
All right. Just to add to what Dr. Kuka said, so if this is implemented and implemented very well and compliance is ensured across board, Timmy, you've said everything that will be involved. One, because Nigerian data will be here, so there will be opportunities. So a lot of the data center today that are struggling maybe to break even will now be more profitable because then they will. There will be more efficiency because they have the workload, and all that. So there'll be cost efficiency. That there will be more employment because today you can only take so much. But if you have all this infrastructure in here, then there will be more employment. A lot of the money that is being spent today to pay for Azure in wherever way we don't even know, AWS and all that will now reside in here. So there will be less pressure on dollar and those money are not small money actually. It's because we've not been able to put them together in dollar and cents. So all those things will be in here. Then I'm also when we also look at this, look at South Africa today. Look at how developed South Africa is in terms of data center. Look at the population of South Africa and look at the population of Nigeria and look at the amount of data centers that you have in South Africa compared to what you have in Nigeria. That is the only difference. So I'm sure that if this is actually done properly, in the next possibly another 5 years, 10 years, maybe not even 10 years, in the next 5 years, we should also almost leveling up with South Africa in terms of that digital economy market. Then compliance, of course, if compliance is, of course, compliant, people will have to comply anyway. But I've talked about job opportunities. I've talked about, dollar being, lots of Nigerian money will be repatriated in here. There will be skills development as well. And then our journey to AI will be faster. Like somebody mentioned, data is the fuel of AI. We have not committed sin now if we are not the one leading the AI, because people have data to train and all that, the technology. If in the next 5 years we're still where we are or we're still trailing, then we will have committed sin. When I mean sin, I mean that we will have been lacking behind. So my point is, if we do this properly, we will also speed up our own journey to AI, our own indigenous sovereign and AI. Thank you.
Thank
Just
you
build
so
on this
much.
quickly.
Okay,
Yes,
go on.
there are many systemic things in terms of monetary policy, the way the naira operates, the changes that have happened, and the sort of ease of doing business, and so on. The time is very, very right. The naira is now a currency that operates in a very clear, managed way. It's been stable, so on. So it creates the great operating environment, the financial environment for foreign cloud providers to come in as well confidently. And that's happening. The inward investment continues to grow and grow. And this is something just beyond digital infrastructure that gives confidence to other providers to come in and operate in this environment. Look, I've been in the old ways years ago about the naira structures that we have, the difficulties, and a lot of that is gone. So it's a right operating environment now. And it's okay to have, global cloud providers or local cloud providers. I was in the US a few years ago, and you find that coexistence, and each have their own unique offerings in terms of scale, agility, functionality, and so on into the marketplace. Create the scale in the marketplace, and you find this kind of coexistence, symbiotic coexistence between both players.
Thank you so much, Doctor. So we have answered questions by Oluwaseun Oluboyo while we were having this conversation. We've also answered some of the other questions. We can do a Q&A now. If there's any question, please indicate and let us know. You can drop in the comments if you have questions. Otherwise, we'll be wrapping it up now. Okay, so thank you so much. Dr. Yele had to step out to attend something. Thank you so much, Dr. Ayotune Koka, Chief Executive Officer, Open Access Data Centers. Thank you so much, Mr. Gbenga David, Chief Executive Officer, Geniserve Limited. And we have had a very interesting and robust discussion this morning around the CBN Directive. Clearly, it shouldn't just be seen as a compliance deadline. It's an indicator of Nigeria's digital infrastructure maturity and readiness. The country has done the work, the digital infrastructure ecosystem has done all the work required, working with the financial services provider, these financial services operators, and really this is a demand anchor for local cloud data centers, is a demand anchor for interconnection, is a demand anchor for financial infrastructure resilience. We have been there, we have done that, and now this is the time to really, really execute this regulation. And as we've said, stimulate the industry, bring some of the benefits we have highlighted around cloud demand, around AI readiness, around financial resilience, around sovereign infrastructure, and so on. Thank you so much. We'll be wrapping up now. We have some events lined up. I'm sure we'll be sending out some announcements over the next few weeks. Eunice, if you have that ready, we can quickly share something very briefly. So we have some of these global views that we'll continue to do, where we're just engaging regulators to just bring up, discuss some of the seemingly intractable challenges the continent has around digital infrastructure and bringing in thought leadership, subject matter experts to them. We'll have a view of that shortly. And we'll also have some of these sessions around CBN, the CBN Directive, and the digital infrastructure ecosystem. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Gbenga.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Hope this was a very interesting session for you. All right, bye everyone.